Hello, and welcome back to what is this podcast?
Welcome to Meet the Moment podcast, produced by the Real Estate Business Institute. This podcast is an exploration of what today's industry leaders and agents need to know to be profitable, productive, and have fun. I'm Matthew Rathbun, and I'm joined by co-host Kimberly Allard as we chat with thought leaders, brokers, and agents who can help agents meet the moment of change in the real estate industry.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Meet the Moment podcast. I'm here with my fabulous co-host, Matthew Rathbun. Matthew, say hello.
Hello, everybody.
Well, so we are excited to continue a discussion on really contracts, nightmares, how to avoid them, and some best practices.
That's right. We are going to be continuing our conversation, looking at some things to help you do a better job and win your clients' respect at the end of the transaction.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us. Enjoy it. You know, you mentioned going over the buyer forms, and we both know as ABRs that if you've done your buyer onboarding, the buyer has already seen the offer form. They've already seen the lead disclosures. They've already seen, maybe not specific to this property, but we've gone over with our clients all of the forms that they need
That's
or
right.
will be signing. So yes, you still need to review it with them again, but I think at least in the last couple of years, the window of opportunity to get an offer done is really tight in many cases, and you might not have 2 hours to go line by line through every paragraph. But if we've done it already in our onboarding, then the buyer's like, yep, we've talked about this. Yep, I understand what this means. And if you're a buyer agent who hasn't done the buyer onboarding, then like you said, you're increasing the chance that the buyer is going to not understand what they're signing, ask you later, and then as a result that doesn't meet their expectations. But and now to the point of checking out the other agent, people think we're joking. There are agents out there that are working, not affiliated with brokers. They're not, or their licenses may be not, up to date. And I feel like we all have an obligation to know who we're dealing with. And in the RENE course, they suggest that we study our other negotiator or the other negotiator in the transaction and see what hot buttons, if any, that we can kind of neutralize. Doesn't mean you're going to roll over at the expense of your client, but if you're the guy that wants one PDF and that's something I can do, and maybe it's a couple of extra steps for me, why wouldn't I do it? Because I'm going to negotiate other things, and I don't want this to be a sticking point. So what great points you brought up.
Yeah, I'll share two other things. You're talking about the buyer and seller onboarding. It's a listing agent in the buyer's home book. Anybody who's taken my marketing and listing class or my SRS classes have seen examples of this. I have basically we have a cheat sheet, a worksheet in those books that is formatted in the exact order of our regional sales contract, but it's not as clinical looking. And it tells the buyer agent, this is what we'd like to see in escrow. This is the email address we would use for delivery. All the stuff that's blank on that agreement, we essentially give a cheat sheet for a buyer agent to fill out exactly what our preference is. They don't have to agree to those terms. It's not a contract, it's not an offer, but there's less guesswork about delivery. We reduce the things, and again, every state's different, but like if I send you over an offer, I don't know what email address you want deliverables to be made to, or I don't know what physical address the seller wants things. Maybe they don't live there and they want things, mailed. We fill all that out. So a buyer agent, and I hate to say this, but we start from the premise that the buyer agent doesn't know what they're doing and they're maybe just freshly licensed, and we're helping them out. We're basically giving them a worksheet to help fill out that form. The other part of that is, as a buyer agent in my buyer consultation guide, I've taken out the most confusing elements like escrow. What does that mean? What does settlement date mean? what is down payment, what is finances. I've broken those down as to talking points with one or two sentences describing each one. And little hack that I wish I had known back, or wish I had access to back then, you do now, is put your contract in ChatGPT and go, hey, what does the buyer need to know in plain language? Give me 10 bullet points of the most pertinent things here. That goes into the buyer consultation guide. So I'm sitting with the buyer. We can start having that conversation now. So when they go to make an offer, they're they're not surprised by the 300 pages of terms that you're asking them to make
Right.
decisions on, right? And at 9 o'clock at night, when you're trying to compete with 10 other offers, you are disadvantaging the client, and they will, that feeling of being disadvantaged or rushed through it will linger with them to every other element you're trying to work through with them for the next 30 or 45 days to closing. Is they will always feel or always remember that at 9:30 at night they were rushed and hurried and tired and exhausted, and you were just writing numbers and rambling things off, as opposed to properly preparing them when they can focus and think about key terms and what they mean.
Yeah, if you're trying to get to yes, time is in your favor.
Yeah,
You do not, and I think it works on both buyer and seller side. You know, if you're a buyer and you want an immediate response, and
sure.
it, and you want an acceptance, you don't say, I'm giving you 3 minutes to review this offer. Give them the time that they need. You know, you can withdraw whenever you want, but to demand a response obviously doesn't work in your favor. And same thing with buyers. Like you said, they will remember the fact that they felt rushed, and they will blame you, and maybe rightly so, because the time and place for contract explanation is at the onboarding or prior to getting to the property. By the time your buyer gets to a property, they should have already been through what it takes. I call, my document is called the home buying process for the buyer. And you
Yeah.
know, and they glaze over. You know, nobody's interested in how the sausage is made until they're reading it. And apparently I'm fixated with sausage today. But you know, I'll give you an example of when I have really regretted not being clearer. You know, in this generation of buyers, I mean, I'm old, but this generation of buyers, they don't always have paper checks. And
Yeah.
you need to overnight a check or hand deliver a check or whatever the custom is in your area. And buyers are like, what do you mean a check? I don't have checks. Don't they take Venmo? Now, thankfully, there are approved methods of transferring money, not necessarily a wire, but things like Deposit Link and other products that are made for real estate escrow. But those also come at a cost. I mean, sometimes there's a $12 or $15 fee. The buyer already feels nickeled and dimed in this type of market, and then to find out they have to pay a fee, well, you know what? I could have prepared them for that weeks ago and said, look, have a paper check and be ready to overnight it or hand deliver it. Or you may have an electronic option. My office provides an electronic option, although I understand not everybody's does. But in the event that that's available to you, there's going to be an additional cost. You might be willing to pay $15 to use a deposit link type of service and save yourself the hassle. I even know some agents that go out and prepay for an express mail envelope and give it to the buyer and leave the address blank, and the buyer simply drops the check in it and handwrites the address to whatever the escrow agent is on the particular property when they find it. And you know, if you're trying to help your buyer facilitate that as a buyer agent, you can still do that. But all of that can be avoided. uh, the last example I'll share with you on that one is, not only did my client not have paper checks, but their money was coming from an investment account where they needed to have a board meeting to release funds because it was, I don't know, it might have been a 401k or something, but the money was not available when it needed to be. And
Yeah.
these are discussions that we need to be having to avoid putting our clients' transactions in jeopardy.
I agree. I'm actually laughing at myself a little bit here because it's oddly enough, just yesterday, somebody was having that, making that statement about a younger generation doesn't understand checks. Um, I had to pay my dues. We talked about this pre-show, for a sportsman club that I'm with, And it's just a bunch of older guys, who go out in the woods and shoot things and have a club, and they only take checks, and they actually have in their rules. It's really kind of cute. Like, it has, with the quotes around it, we do not accept quote unquote plastic. You must pay by check. And I was getting ready to go to the meeting, our membership meeting, to renew, or to actually pay the fees rather. And I couldn't remember if I even owned a checkbook. I was digging through my drawer and I found, probably 7 or 8 years since I used it last, the checkbook. But we had buyers. One of my agents called me, who's in her mid-20s or so. She goes, "Hey, I'm really embarrassed about this." She goes, "My clients don't have a checkbook, and the settlement company that they're using doesn't have a deposit link to wire money." She goes, "What's the other option?" I said, "Cashier's check. Just have them go get a cashier's check." She goes, "Okay, okay, cool, cool." She goes, "What's the cashier's check?"
Yeah.
Like, okay, I because you and I are about the same age, and I'm like, I feel really, really old right now. But it those little things are discussions that should have been held before. And you're right, it's not just for buyers and onboarding, but the sellers. We have a checklist of things to anticipate when an offer comes in. And it's the key things they really care about. It's probably 10 to 15 that we just review during the listing onboarding. And look, and some of you out there listening are going, "Oh my God, this is so much work to have this, this listing, the buyer appointment, listing appointment." Look, when the NAR settlement came down and everybody was scurrying about because, oh my God, they had to show buyers value to get them to sign a buyer agency agreement. They're asking, like, how do I show value? Education. That's what they hired you for. They hired you as a knowledge worker, educating them in that first meeting. And think about the power of saying, "I know you want to go see a house before we do. Let's talk about them things." You mentioned the name of your form. Mine is just the buyer journey form, and the buyer journey form talks about the major steps in between. And then we get to the contract. We talk about things you need to know: what escrow is, home, what inspections you have a right to negotiate, what they or the rough estimate what they cost. And you can see those buyers who are just rushing to get out the door, and they get there, settle down and go, "Oh, I did, but we hadn't thought about this." And I feel strongly, building rapport and building trust with your clients quickly is a relative term. When a lot of agents say, how do I get my clients to sign? How do I get my potential buyers to sign this buyer agent agreement quickly? I'm like, well, you're thinking 15 minutes. I'm thinking an hour and a half, because I can't do it in 15 minutes. But an hour and a half, I could sit down and start talking to that buyer about the things they should expect and anticipate, including the contract, the major contract terms, so that they're not asking questions while they're trying to ratify how to get an escrow check written when they don't have a checkbook, or what a cashier's check is, or whether they can wire money in for a fee. um, I feel like we as agents let our clients down if we don't do those things. If we don't build, and you will build the rapport, and you will build the trust when you slow them down and go, "Let me help you solve problems you didn't know you had." It is amazing to me how many, even up to 30 and 30 years of age, 20 years of age, people who benefit from VA loans don't understand how VA loans work. And they've been told since enlistment that a benefit of serving in the military is the Veterans Administration loan, and that they can do zero down or no money down loans, which is true. But no one's telling them that that doesn't mean that you don't have to have money. It just means you can get 100% loan. You still have to have money for settlement fees. You still have to have money for inspections. You still have to have money for escrow deposits. And it is, you're working against yourself and your clients if you just run the hell out the door when they show up, do the minimal thing you do to get a buyer agency agreement signed, show them properties for a month, and then when they get ready to write an offer, that's when you realize they don't have any money at all to do this thing. You've wasted your time, and worse, you've wasted their time by not properly preparing them. Where you could have taken an hour and a half to go, when we go to write a contract, here's how you're prepared.
You use the word rapport, and if we if we compare it to any other decision, major purchase decision. So let's say you're going to put on a roof in your house, or you're going to replace the heating system, or you're going to buy a
Right.
car. Arguably, all of those things could be tens of thousands of dollars. I'm not making a 15-minute decision on who's putting a roof on my house.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not making a 15-minute decision on the air conditioning HVAC company. And buying a car takes some people months. So if we make those types of decisions in our lives and we choose to be informed by maybe comparing service providers or educating ourselves, let's use the roof example. Somebody comes to my house and wants to put on a roof and says, "Oh yeah, it's going to cost you $10,000."
Yeah.
And says, "I can start next week," and leaves. And then the next guy comes in and says, "Well, it's going to be $12,000," and, writes it down on a carbon copy piece of paper on a clipboard. And then the next person comes in and says, "Well, it's going to be 16,000," and I'm ready to shut them down because they're way higher than the other people. But that
Yeah.
person tells me, "I'm going to have 9 people here. We're going to get it done in half a day. I'm going to bring my own dumpster. I'm going to
Right.
tarp all of your, shrubberies. I'm going to use a magnetic device to remove any nails that are loose. I'm going to hand nail the roof. We're not going to machine nail it. So we make sure we get in the adhesive strip. I'm going to have a porta potty here so my 9 workers aren't peeing in your shrubs. And we'll park off site so we don't clog the street and your driveway."
Yeah.
If I knew that about this one person who then presents me a written proposal and took the time to get me to understand, there's a pretty good chance I'm paying more for that level of service, because what I'm thinking is the other guys must be cheaper because they're not doing any of this. Now, I can't guarantee that that's how everybody thinks, but when we take the time to inform our customers or our consumers or our soon to be clients, they're better clients and we get better deals and better contracts. And it really, the rapport, like you said, we have to think about how we make our own decisions. Why would we expect somebody to sign an agreement with us on the hood of a car when we've just met them in the driveway and then have respect for us? That's like a one night stand, right? I mean, probably a bad example. But I did want to go back to something else that is helpful when working with clients and offers, and now we're on kind of on the selling side. You reminded me, often there's a sense of urgency when responding to offers. You, meaning us as agents, have set a deadline which we should not have set. It should be our clients telling us if there's a deadline, but some agents go off the rails and fabricate a deadline.
Yeah.
Having said that, we've now get this deadline. You've got 12 agents calling you at the deadline, trying to figure out what you're going to do. And you're on the phone trying to talk to your sellers, or maybe you're even with them in person and you're shoving papers in front of them. Everybody's offer looks different. Maybe it's a different form. Maybe it's obviously a different pre approval with different conditions. The seller's just overwhelmed. This is not a positive experience for them.
Yeah.
I and maybe you or other people have found that you can create a Google form that asks the pertinent information. Now, really, what is your seller concerned about? Obviously, price. But I find that once I hand a seller an offer and tell them the price, they shut down. I like to start at the back end. I like to start at, when are they closing? How much money are they borrowing? Who are they pre approved with? What are the contingencies? When are they going to give us escrow and how much? And then what is the amount that they're willing to pay? So I put all of this in a Google form, which then translates it to a Google spreadsheet. And I am able to work live with the seller client. So as offers are coming in, I can just punch them into the form. It's real easy. It auto populates the Google spreadsheet. And then my client can check in on that at any given time. Do go a step further, and I'll highlight for my clients in the Google spreadsheet a red for something that isn't what we're looking for. So maybe they have a house to sell contingency, or I'll highlight in green something that really stands out, like they're financing a very low amount. But then it gives my client a visual that's very easy to compare one offer to the next as opposed to a bunch of forms. And I also find that it helps me save some time in that discussion because they're not lost shuffling paperwork. And again, it makes them feel like they were really prepared to make a decision as a seller.
Yeah, I'm gonna just add one little thing to that because I do the same thing with the Google Sheet, and I send them a link and I get on Zoom and I'm like, hey, let's go through these column by column. So um, but to identify the sheets, I do use the initials of the buyers
Yeah,
instead of their name, which also helps with the fair housing issue. There's not going to be, if ever there was an accusation that you didn't treat someone fairly, you can come back and say the seller they didn't see a name, they had no idea if it was Gonzalez or Johnson or Smith or Rathbun or Allard. They saw just the initials of the homeowner. That was my identifier, or buyer rather. That was the identifier. And all they saw when they made their decision was a spreadsheet with just the financial elements outlined, or closing dates or things on there. And, especially now when we have buyer agents negotiating their own compensation at different levels, and it's not just a preset number. The seller didn't predetermine. In some cases, I know some of you are still doing that, but the seller didn't predetermine the buyer's compensation. Now that's another variable, just like
sure.
settlement costs or anything else. And that spreadsheet is easy, like you said, to highlight. You can make notes on it in real time when you're sharing with it by Zoom or even in person and putting in your iPad or laptop. But it brings a lot of clarity to them in their head. And another thing in that same vein is I have a um, 1 or 2 page document that I send to sellers. If the house is subject to a home inspection, I have used plain language and an outline what their options are for a home inspection. Like, here are your 4 options. You can offer credit, or you can say no, or you can say yes with caveat, or you can change it to narrow down the decision making process to 4 elements, and then explaining what happens next and what they're agreeing to, and something outside of contract legalese. And so we ratify. My follow-up email to that seller is, here's a reminder what we talked about during your listing presentation. Here's a reminder of the process now for home inspection and your options if repairs are requested. And then I use that when we sit down and go through the offer. Again, all of these things are what makes you stand out as an agent when you're looking at these little hacks to keep your buyer and seller grounded and not freaking out. Because I feel like most of the buyers and sellers I talk to, when I'm going through that agreement, if they didn't hear it beforehand, it sounds like the Charlie Brown bum womp 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 teacher, right? And your seller hears 3 things: how much money am I getting, when am I getting it, what do I have to do to get there? And some of these other details get lost. And so we try to do it when they're not in the heat of the moment. They got their kids to bed and life is settled, and it's 10:30 at night and you're going through 5 offers. They Most of the stuff, because most of us use standardized regional forms, they should have been prepared for well before the offer came in, so you can focus more succinctly on the things that matter.
I One of my most valued documents, and I think you touched on it, is I call it preparing for the home inspection. And I have one for buyers and I have one for sellers. But you're absolutely right. I put it in clear language that the only thing, unless it's different, but in our standard contract, the only thing that the home inspection contingency allows for is it allows for the buyer to either move forward with the transaction or move out of it, and there is no agreement of the parties to renegotiate the terms or the price. So, I'll say to the seller, like something like this: after the negotiation, if the buyer isn't satisfied, you are under no obligation to renegotiate, but the buyer can walk away. And
Yeah.
typically, sellers appreciate knowing what they can do, not being told what they have to do. And, then they're like, okay, well, we'll see where that ends up. But so many sellers have a different understanding of what the home inspection is. It's not a pass or fail. Is the buyer satisfied? And again, subject to whatever language your state provides. But it's really helpful. I mean, and I'm going to laugh over some of these things, but none of them were funny at the time. I've had sellers melt down because they come home and find out that the home inspector ran the dishwasher. Um, why didn't you tell me? Um, I've also had home inspectors or buyers or whoever is at the home inspection use a toilet, and maybe not flush it. And that really, shame on whoever was at the home inspection checking those things. But, you got to do a final run through of the home before people leave and adjust blinds and things like that. But it's really I think sellers hear home inspections, they don't realize how violating it can be to find out that yes, there was somebody opening and closing your windows, or there was somebody testing, certain outlets, or running your shower, or looking underneath your vanity. So when you set the expectation with your seller, these are things that's going to happen. Again, you lessen the likeliness that they're going to be really upset with you, but
Mhm.
also you're giving them some knowledge. Some of the other things I will say is leave the home 30 minutes early, because inspectors like to show up early and try to get a representation out of you. Move things out of the closet if there's a scuttle in the attic, so somebody doesn't have to move your stuff. Buyers get the same type of pre-warning at a home inspection. I can't tell you how many home buyers that have shown up for home inspections that are dressed like they're going to work afterwards and it's pouring rain out. I'm like, a portion of this inspection will be conducted outside. Dress accordingly. Wear the appropriate footwear. We might be crawling in a crawl space. Bring payment, bring questions. And I'm actually as pretty blunt as to say this is not the time to tour family and friends through the property. The home inspector will want 100% of your attention. So by setting those things up in advance, again, I think it just positions everybody for success.
It does. And having to those things that you mentioned, having it in a checklist format, I think is very important. And again, if you're getting lost and you're like, I don't know where to start on this. First of all, we have some templates and things inside of the the REBI, the Real Estate Business Institute's portal. There's a couple templates and things, not necessarily everything we're talking about, but a few things. And then ChatGPT can help you with the other one, just brainstorming ideas. Put your contract in there and say, hey, what are some after ratification things buyer and seller should do? One of the things that, because our law just changed, we're recording this in July 23rd and July 1st in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we got a new standards for septic inspections, and they're pretty specific. And for the first time ever, it's not just did Billy Bob go out there with a T-bar and they smell poop, it's bad. Now it's very specific, and you have to, empty the tank and look in it and camera this and do this and that. One of the things that the inspector has to have before they can do the inspection is a copy of the original operating permit that was issued before the septic system was installed. How that could be a 50-year-old document and it's in a cardboard box down at the records office. And some other jurisdictions, it's online and you can just email them and they'll send it right to you. That seller should have a post listing checklist or post ratification checklist of here's some things we anticipate a septic inspection, here's 3 things you need to do to make sure this goes smoothly. When you look at the NAR profile of home buyer and seller, there's 2 things that I think people should pay attention to. One is that list of things that the home buyer or seller was looking for before they hired us is not the same thing that they found most valuable about us at the end of the transaction. And so, helping you find a home is what they're looking for an agent, but what they found valuable was successfully negotiating a contract in their benefit. If you want to win that moment, which is important for referral clients and some other things, uh, do the extra. Give them some clarity in the path, keep them on track, give them the checklists so they can keep track of these things. They have to do it. Like for post home inspection, for my sellers, if I get a list of repairs, and let's say it's more than probably 3, I set up a Trello board between them and I. I'm not a contractor. I don't organize repairs for my clients. I know a lot of agents do. I think that's a dangerous path and also not what I got paid for. But I set up a Trello board, and that Trello board acts as a checklist between the seller and I. And I put all the repairs in there, and then there's a sub checklist of hire the contractor, confirm the cost, and the sellers go crazy at the fact that I've organized this for them. We both can communicate in the same board. I can see their progress. I can call them and say, when we do our weekly check-in, I noticed on Trello you haven't done X, Y, and Z. Do you need more names? Do you need more contractors? Please make sure you follow up on this. That little bit of accountability keeps their, because we all get busy and we forget, keeps their mind on track, keeps you on track. And it's free. Trello's free. The system is simple to set up. And I'll just say this as we start wrapping up our time. This is not, as we let off with, this is not just about making your life easier. This isn't about, this is about honoring the trust the client gave you. That to me is the biggest part of this. And if I can keep some clarity of mind, I can keep some peace, and I can put some checklists in, and I can prepare them for things before, and I write solid agreements and addendums outside of the norm, that makes me stand apart. When we're looking at what's coming next in our industry, and you and I have been hearing a lot about this as leaders in our industry, um, you know, people look at different things, but AI tends to be one of the big things. And that's such a broad term and broad thing. What we do know is consumers are no longer using, well, they are, but a lot of people, about 30 to 40% now, are using AI to ask questions of instead of Google. And so Google and AI index how they find and pick agent recommendations and things for you, the consumer, differently. And SEO used to be the more stuff you could write on your blog and your website, the more likely a consumer would find your website. That's old mentality. Now AI is looking at the reviews that you were given, the independent stuff on your Google business page, the independent stuff on Zillow, not necessarily your website as a primary way to answer a question when the consumer is looking for a buyer or seller. The reviews you get at the end of the transaction are going to be, they've always been important, they're going to be far more important in the future on these independent ran sites, as AI is becoming a trusted advisor to help consumers connect with service providers and services. And so all of this stuff is not just about, and it is primarily about honoring the trust the consumer gave you, doing the good job. It's also about having and equipping that consumer to give you a good review and refer you to friends and family in the end, because you stood out by being organized and competent and reducing their stress. When a consumer gets stressed and freaked out and the shit hits the fan at the end of the transaction, they're left wondering whether they tell you this or not. They're left wondering if a better agent could have reduced the friction in their transaction.
100%. It is n- not how they got there. It's what they're feeling at the last moment when you
Yeah.
leave them at the closing table or at the walkthrough. And you could lose months of work and effort and, quite frankly, excellent service at the very last moment because of a short oversight that could have been avoided.
Yeah. There was a closing a few years ago, and these were clients who were actually friends before the transaction. And I say that because it gave me a little bit more leeway to do what I did. But at the closing, these buyers who were just being jerks, there was absolutely no value in what they were doing. But they were trying to nickel and dime and get some more repairs, and that the house wasn't clean, and the house absolutely was clean. And they were demanding $500 at closing, and they couldn't even justify it. They just we want $500 more. We just do. And my she looked at the client looked at me, and she passed a little pit stick, because I have this conversation where we go into meetings. I'm like, do not say or agree to anything other than being cordial and shaking hands. Anything that becomes a conflict, I let me speak on your behalf. We will leave the room. Pass me a note, whatever. So she passed me a note. She goes, I'm fine with the 500. And I looked at her and I looked across the table and said, we're done. You have gone way past the point you were supposed to. I need to go talk to my clients. We're done with the closing. If it has to wait, because it was a Friday, if it has to wait to Monday, it has to wait to Monday. Your demand is just isn't reasonable. Let me go talk to the clients, because I didn't want my client sitting, and she started crying, sitting there at the table, feeling like she had to do it because she had to get this done, and making a $500 bad decision. So I broomed them out of the room. We get to the conference room, and I said, look, you're in a position where you can't lose right now. It's unlikely they're going to walk over 500, but they have no contractual right to what you're saying. We have all the authority in this. And she goes, I know, I can't imagine giving them another dime. We go back into the room, and the buyers are like, fine, we'll just close. And so they sign the documents. We walk out there. 7 years later, that client referred, and they'd referred a few people to me over those 7 years, but they referred to a client to me 7 years later. And that client showed me the text. That new client showed me the text where he said, are you going to also stand up for me at $500 when you don't have to? Because that's what my client said, is we were willing to get the $500. Matthew saved it by telling us no and negotiating in front of us at the 11th hour. Now, I am not a person to be a bulldog or an ass from the get-go. I want to reserve that. I want to be cordial and friendly and professional so that when you do something stupid and I have to use, as my kids call it, the dad voice, or I have to be more demanding, we are changing tactics and what you're doing is not appropriate. If you start off from being an asshole from the very beginning, there's nowhere to go. And everybody wants to fight against you and try to prove that they're smarter or better or prettier than you are. And so the contract is our best ability to defend our client's interest. The next step is we have to be able to negotiate successfully, which will be a later episode. We'll do pulling some of our best and favorite things out of RE and other classes that Kimberly pitched that, and I'm like, that's a great idea. We're gonna talk a little bit later about how we do
Yeah,
that. So
and before we close, just to let our listeners know, if we sound like we know what we're talking about, it's because we've taken the RENE and the SRS and the ABR. I mean, a lot of these things are in these classes and courses and in the materials.
yeah,
We're not necessarily reinventing any wheels here.
no, yeah, we're taking some good ideas from other instructors and other writers and things
Sure.
that have come up, and quite frankly, we've learned from our own mistakes. I can't speak for Kimberly. I think she's practically flawless in every way as a broker. But but for me, there's been things where I do not like to be embarrassed. I do not like to get caught with my pants down, and I don't shrug off a mistake I made very easily if I
No.
make it. Take ownership for it, and I take it as a lesson hard learned, and I will immediately say, what will I do next time to ensure this never happens again? And some of these checklists and these agreements and these clarifying journey documents are to ensure that both my client and I are on the same page, if nothing else. It's not good enough for you to go, I told them. You got to prove it. And some of these instruments and tools that help us out do that. Kimberly, what else you got for us?
I got nothing. Are we going to go to my favorite app?
Yeah, what's your favorite app today?
Okay. Well, I have a lot of favorite apps, but this one seems to be everybody likes to talk about professionalism in our industry, and some
Yeah.
of us get frustrated. There's a way if you work, obviously, if you're a broker, or if you're an agent on a team or just an independent agent working under a broker, there is NAR put together the commitment to excellence, which is been reduced to or shortened to C2EX. So you can go to NAR's site and search for C2EX, and there's an app. And you are able to, and I would suggest that you do it as a group in your brokerage, because we all benefit from the number of people, the higher number of people that complete this program, the more professional we'll all become. But try to challenge your broker and those people in your brokerage to complete the C2EX. It's an endorsement that NAR has, and it is the only endorsement that NAR has. It's not a designation or a certification, it's an endorsement. So check that out. It's free, it's self paced, and then you get a nice little certificate that you can put on your parents' refrigerator.
All right. So I'm going to do two things. One will be an app, and then one will be something that I think is overlooked. My app today is the Black Magic Cam. It's an app for the iPhone. It replaces the default camera app on your phone. And the Magic app has a lot more control over lighting, and they have something called LUTs, which is filters that you may design and save and like. It gets a greater depth of field. It uses the cameras on your phone way better for whatever reason than the default camera app is on the phone. It is absolutely free. It can be remotely controlled from other phones or iPad or Apple Watch. It's just tons and tons of great features. It's free. It's incredible. If you're doing any type of video work, that's the app that you want to be doing it in to help you out. And it also works with Bluetooth microphones and some other things. So that's my app. Go check that out. The other thing I want to mention is we talked a little bit about forms and documents and hacks and all these things. If you're listening to this, you are likely either a candidate or a member of the Real Estate Business Institute. If you're neither, you need to go join the Real Estate Business Institute through taking some of our classes and training. But there's a lot of stuff in there that in that site, the rebinstitute.com, that people overlook, and we're adding stuff all the time. We have checklists. We now have cheat guides. We have a new AI prompt guide. We also have a whole library of webinars that have been recorded in the past and micro learning sessions, contract negotiations in general, whole bunch of stuff in there that you should go check out. You're leaving stuff on the table that you are a beneficiary of as a REBI member, and some of it as a candidate. That really will help you out. Just go look at the downloadables, go look at some of the training classes, and some other resources in there. You'll do yourself a favor, and always be learning. That's what we do here. Kimberly, thank you for hanging out with me today and having this conversation.
Fabulous chat as always. Thank you.
All right. So with that, we're done. Thank you so much for listening, and go check out all the other episodes we have in the past. We've got some good stuff out there. Until next time. The Meet the Moment podcast is a production of the Real Estate Business Institute, an affiliate of the National Association of Realtors. Special thanks to CEO Jenny Scheib and to Dan Shea, our editor and content producer. The views and ideas expressed in this podcast are not necessarily shared or endorsed by REBI. All recommendations made in this episode were merely provided as best practices. The practices of any realtor are subject to the Realtor Code of Ethics, the laws and licensing jurisdiction, broker policies, and competent legal advice. Visit www.rebinstitute.com for more information, resources, education, and upcoming events.